Okay, so part two. These are the other 4 Daddy Bear mug bodies that I've made. They have got the maker's mark, a good seam around the base, tidied up the edge so we don't have any cracks, there's no sort of potential splitting, and it's got that kind of harder feel. It's still cool to touch, so there's still quite a bit of moisture in there, so when we are applying the other bits and pieces, like a foot ring here, we need to make a good seal, but we can't just grind it in, because we will go through the base of here. So there's still a bit of persuasion and a little bit of you know, jiggery pokery to be done. So these 4 you didn't see me make. This is the one you saw me make. I just put a bit of cling film around it to try and slow the drying process down, because I didn't want those cracks to come back. So yeah, I'll get rid of these and then we can start on this one. Okay, so we now need to apply the foot ring. This is just sat on top at the moment. All of the pieces that I use for bearwear have kind of been sort of developed over the last sort of few months into a pattern, so it's almost like assembling a dress. I know the parts, I know how they go together. So what I've done is I've used my pin tool just to mark around the outside and around the inside, so that I'm left with an indication on here of where I need to score and slip, and then I'll also do the same on here. Now this is quite dry and this is also quite dry, so I'm going to score it, put some water on, score it, put some slip on. You need quite a bit of moisture. You don't want it to be too kind of gungy, because that will sort of slow down the process, but hopefully you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm just going to go around. You don't need to dig in particularly, but the surface of the clay is very smooth. We've spent quite a bit of time smoothing off this base, and that's not going to be helpful if we want the water to penetrate and soften the clay enough to make a bond. So just going to put a little bit of, it's like splashing water on its face just to wake it up, just to sort of say, ha ha ha, we aren't done yet. And then I'm just gonna, no more pressure really with this, just because there's a bit more water in there, you've got a bit more movement in the clay. You can see where you've been. I'm just going to get rid of that little pile of slip, and now I'm going to pop slip in here. Now I'm quite meticulous. I mean, my workspace can be a mess, but I'm quite meticulous in trying to get things to look and work properly. So I do work quite slowly, but then I've not really seen that many other people work, so maybe they're just as slow. Obviously wheel thrown pottery is quite a bit faster, and probably more glamorous, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily better. So I'm just going to put one more little line of scratches in there. So now the clay that's under there has been sort of activated, and then I will do exactly the same thing with this, and then we will apply it and you'll see the next bit. So I've got my area on base prepped, and then I've also got my foot ring scratched and scored and slipped. Again, take a little bit of time to get this in the right place, because you don't want to be trying to remove it again. And then this is where I'm just sort of, again, if you remember when we were paddling the side earlier, this is where you kind of just apply a little bit of pressure all the way around. And I'm going to try and do the same thing and just have that little explosive moment of contact. Okay, now you probably didn't see, or maybe you did, that as you do that, you are pushing it down and you start to get a little bit of a seam coming out. Now, because I want to make sure that this is properly stuck, and again it's a little bit dry, I'm just going to put some more slip round here to make sure that I can seal that edge. And I should probably do something similar on the inside. Just kind of pushing that in now so that you've got a good joint between the two bits of clay that you are trying to join. Now I'm going to do the whole slappy thing again, and this time we're just going to go on the inside and try just to encourage that inside to stick down a little bit more. Quite happy with that, but what I am going to do is use another one of the random internet tools. Okay, so this has got like a flat edge profile. Just go around and tidy that up there, and do the same thing on the inside so that a lot of that sort of roughness that's there from the brush has gone. Just going to smooth out some of the last bits of slip. Don't forget that slip is just clay, so leaving it on there is not a bad thing. And then I'll get a sponge, which I don't have on my table for some reason. Oh no, I do, it's in here. Sorry. Just quite dry this time. Just go around and just sort of finesse that. So now you've got your foot ring applied. Yeah, that's it. So that has just raised it off the surface of whatever you're going to put it on. It just gives it a little bit more, a little bit of lightness rather than being a solid base. So now I need to think about this handle. So remember earlier we just put a stamp on it, so that's just got a little bit of like a detail to make it slightly more interesting. It's worth bearing in mind that textures and indentations in the clay now, although they might not look much, will affect how the glaze appears on the finished piece. So just going to give it a little bit of a rub over. I've measured this so it's got the right distance to come out from the body of the mug and also the right height. But what I haven't done is I haven't prepped these two contact points properly yet, because if I try and put it on as it is, it's a flat cut, but the edge of my cup is not. So you've got that sort of wiggle. So I'm going to put a little cut in here and a little cut in here, and then I'll score and slip and squeeze it all together. I'll show you that. Cookie cutters are a great thing for pottery, well, or for cookies, I suppose. Sorry, that was probably quite noisy. So I'm going to use this, which is the same thing I used to cut the base plate, and I'm just going to use that to give me more of a profile that matches, oh, it's still quite sticky, matches the side of my pot. So I don't know whether you can see that one. Where are you? It's got a slight curve. That one, which I haven't done yet, is kind of completely flat. See whether I can do this one without making a terrible noise. No is the answer. Now this, my handles are thicker than the body of the wall of my thing. My mug, it's not a thing. So these are still quite moist. I try to leave these as long as possible because it's difficult to apply pressure with anything else. You can't really paddle this onto the mug, that would be a disaster. So you have to be fairly certain that this is going to retain its shape. So all I'm going to do is, again, agitate and weight these surfaces up, put a little bit of water on, maybe not as much because, as I say, it's not as wet. I'm going to cross cut it the other way, so this is not first time and then second time. Get a nice sort of little, don't worry about spare cement, spare slip, sludge, don't worry about any of that. That's going to be sorted in a moment. Okay, so just going to put that to one side, and then we need to mark on our mug. Here is my seam. Think about where you want the handle to go. So I quite like to have the seam furthest away from me. Now I am prejudiced. I'm right-handed, so I make right-handed mugs. Sorry to my brother Neil, he's left-handed. It's a lifelong struggle. So I'm going to put my handle here. Now I've got my little sort of random T-square thing. This is going to help me, if I try and show you, get the 2 anchor points for the handle vertical. Sorry, I really had to think about that then. So I'm going to mark on where they are, score and slip, and then you'll see me hopefully attach the handle. Now, if you remember earlier, I was talking about the fact that I'm not too worried about hiding the seam. I think if something is handmade, then it's okay to look handmade. Why would you spend a lot of time trying to achieve perfection? That doesn't mean that you shouldn't take time over the finish. The finish should always be intentional, not accidental, but it doesn't have to be immaculate. I'm saying that because my bearware handles, they should always go from the very top to the very bottom. Sometimes they're a little bit shorter, sometimes they sit a little bit under, a little bit higher. And I suppose if I was making a set, then I would absolutely nail it and get them right, but there's that little bit of variation which I quite like. So I've got 2 little anchor points and my handle, and then the idea is that you just line them up. Just give it a little bit of a squeeze. Now, it's attached, but it's not attached properly. So, supporting on the inside, I'm just going to wiggle it sort of side to side and up and down. You can see lots of slip coming out. That is not a reason to panic, because all you're going to do is you're going to get a little kidney, maybe another one of these little random things, and just sort of tidy it up. It's like a little bit of pointing. My dad would be proud of me. He was a builder, and I like to think that in some weird way I'm building something, and he liked tea, so that's good. So that one is pretty good. Now I'm actually going to invert it because I want to try and make this reach this level here. So again, just going to sort of up and down, side to side, trying to make sure that all of the clay has met its friends, and just seam that bit off. Try not to lose your sludge pot. Now, what I did then was a little bit incorrect because I was kind of brushing away. Remember, you're trying to make a bond, so I'm actually just gonna agitate this a little bit, so it gives us another chance to just pull the clay of the handle in to the clay of the mug. All right. Now I've got squished bits of slip coming out down here and also sort of in here. I'm not going to worry about taking them off yet, because you sort of want that there to slow down the drying process. You don't want it to dry too quickly because then it increases the chances of cracking. And you can always take off excess later. I would rather have more in these seams at this stage than too little. So there you go. Sorry, I don't know whether I disappeared off camera then. I got a little bit yeah, anyway, so this is not like making a meringue. I'm not going to try and pick it up by the handle now to prove a point. No. It is a functioning mug. It's got an attached base, a rather nice foot ring, and the handle. If you can see again, I've still got this little distortion here. Now, as it dries, stoneware clay like this will sort of lose between sort of 12 and 15% of its volume. So it is going to sort of draw into itself, and these little distortions will kind of, you'll think you've got rid of them, and then it'll maybe start appearing again. So again, while it's still slightly malleable, you can always just, I wouldn't necessarily worry about doing it all the way down, but if you just gave it a little nudge in, you can kind of deceive the eye into thinking that it's got a much truer profile. Okay, so that is a daddy bear. It does need trimming. I might try and do that later, and then it's all done in a day. It doesn't take a day to make a mug, that's ridiculous. I mean, I've got another 4 to put bits and pieces on now. But yeah, that's it, and that's the process. If you remember what we started with first thing, it looks quite good. I always get a buzz from that, from the end result. Sorry, I'm stuttering rather, because you start with this. That's what you didn't see. So that, yesterday was rolled out. This morning, the side, the wall and the base were put together. This afternoon we put the foot ring and the handle on. That's pretty much it. A little bit of trimming, and then it'll be biscuit fired, and then it'll be sanded if there's any sort of rough edges on it, because don't forget it's something that's going to come into contact with your lips, and then it'll be glazed. So let's see what the last part looks like when I get to trim it later. Okay, so this is going to be the final part of the making. One of the things that I do struggle with is to stop fiddling. I'll see something the following day and try to sort of correct it, but basically what we've got now from what we're about to do should be the end of the process. So it's got a nice, it's still cool, so that means it's still got enough dampness in there to sort of accept a few changes, in the same sense that you can only really build successfully when it's the right, got the right levels of moisture. Decoration is also easier when you've judged the time to be right. So that's hopefully what we're going to do. The plan is I'm going to use this little tool here to trim off on the inside and just a little bit off the outside to thin out this rim to make it a bit more pleasurable, shall we say. I'll also use my damp sponge just to soften that up, and then I shall add some sort of decoration on the outside. And now bearware traditionally is just a simple sort of scratch design, either using this, which you've seen before, or one of these. You have to be bold with decoration once you've started. That's it, you got to go with it. Okay, so let's see where this goes. So the idea is now just to put a little bit more finesse on the edge here. I don't know whether you can see, but that is just bringing off a very small amount. Because the mug is relatively dry, it doesn't have a lot of purchase on the banding wheel, so you don't want to go mad. You can't really push against it so much. Now you see how it just leapt? It just stepped out of the way. You'll end up with something that doesn't actually seem that satisfying. What you've got to remember is that you're trimming off now, and then you will, well, what I will do is I will finally just use a sponge to soften up the hard edges. The problem we've got is we can't do the same thing around the outside because we've got the handle in the way, so you have to be a little bit more circumspect. I'm not sure that's the right word, but anyway. So ratty little bit of sponge. We don't need a special thing for this. And then what we're just going to do is we're just going to very lightly run that over. So that should take off all the edges. Now it's bumped again a little bit, but that's fine. Mugs can be lots of different things. You can try and get a really fine rim, or you can get a chunky one like this. Don't forget that it is going to lose 10-15% of its and then yeah, it's not actually going to feel quite so thick when the end results come through. Okay, so I'm going to invert it because my first bit of decoration is going to be around here, and then I'm going to do a scratch design around the side. I'm not entirely sure how I decided to do this particular design because it's not particularly sophisticated. All I'm doing is scratching from the foot ring out. Now this does help, and I think one of the reasons I might have started doing it was to disguise any little mistakes. Okay, it's okay to admit that there are mistakes. Like I said before, it's handmade pottery. You won't get it perfect. So what we've ended up with, if you can see, is just a very sort of simple texture around there. What I will do is I'm actually going to use a slightly more bold carving technique. So you can get these in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. I'm just going to use the very end of this. I'm going to see if I can do this so you can see. It's not that easy. And I'm just going to pull down, again in quite a bold way. Now, I've done a mug in this design before. I've only done one, and it turned out to be very popular. So popular that I didn't sell it. I just kept it for myself. And the idea is that it kind of looks a bit grass-like or a bit reed-like. Sorry, you can't really... I don't want to mess it up by trying to show you what I'm doing. Different size, different thicknesses. Quite like to keep the direction fairly similar. And then we'll just sort of trim round like that. Being careful as you get towards the handle because you don't want to compromise the design. And you see, just got quite a simple look there. I'm going to get a big dry brush. Just get rid of all the loose bits. I think this is the quickest dry that I've actually seen on some pots. It'll be interesting to see what the end result is like. I'm actually going to go back in and just put some more in between. I think it looks a little chunky at the moment. Again, remember there's that contraction. So I might just start round from this side. No, this isn't going to work. Okay, and I'm just trying to get into the gaps. They can waver, they can cross. Like I said before, decoration or the finish on anything just has to be intentional. And that doesn't mean you just kind of say, oh yeah, that's what I meant to do. It's a case of actually thinking about what it's going to be used for, how the glaze is going to work. Now these kind of fairly deep grooves are really nice for glaze because it tends to channel them down a little bit. So, sorry. Not really that much to be said about this. It's just one of those things. So when this is fired, let me just get rid of all of this. There's a lot of tidying up to do in pottery. It's really important actually, and I should probably do a video about that at some point, but let's not worry about the hazards. So you actually got something that's going to feel really nice against the hand. It's got texture, it's got balance, the foot ring lifts it off so it casts quite a nice little shadow. The one thing I will do, one of the last things I'll do, is I'll get the big tool here again and I'm just going to run it over there to soften where the kind of decoration that's gone vertically and the decoration that's come horizontally, where they meet. I'll just trim that off a little bit, and that should be it. So there you go. So I hope that's kind of been helpful. You've seen how this has been transformed. There will be a little bit more finessing to do because as these edges here, as it sort of dries down, you can just sort of grind those ever so slightly because again that might be quite tough once you're holding it. But now it worked, you know, I wasn't going to do the meringue test earlier, but the meringue test is good. That's it. So that's what I make at the moment, and that's kind of how I would plan to be teaching in my workshop. I'm not just here to ask for money, of course not, and it's not all about money, is it? It's just about support. So if you are interested, or if you kind of like what you've seen, please sort of pass it on. If you can contribute to the Kickstarter, the only thing I sort of need at the moment is a kiln. I've got the clay, I've got the tools, I've got the workshop space, which is amazing. So yeah, it's going to happen. So yeah, anyway, this has been fun. This has been much more fun than I thought it would be. I might turn out to be one of those slightly addicted people who just wants to be on YouTube all the time. I won't be, don't worry. I have plenty of people around me who will tell me to stop. So yes, that's a daddy bear in a day. That's made me very happy, that one. I'm just about to trim the rest and give it a couple of weeks. You'll see that on the website. Okay, thanks ever so much and enjoy, the rest of your Sunday.